Well, good afternoon, everyone. Wherever you're checking in from the world, my name is Kyle. I'm with High Point Scientific, and tonight you're looking at a live view of the full moon. Now, March's full moon is also known as the warm moon, and we're looking at an absolutely beautiful view tonight. Tonight, I'll be taking your questions about astronomy, the nighttime sky, the moon, and everything in between as we share these beautiful, absolutely stunning views of the lunar surface through my Apertura 72 EDR refractor telescope. Now, before I go forward in this video, I will say give us a like, subscribe to our channel, share our video on Facebook and on YouTube, help get the word out, get people excited about astronomy in the nighttime sky. It's what we love to do here at High Point Scientific. We love sharing these views with you, and the more live streams we have, the more people tuning in, the better, the more the algorithm sort of favors us. So that way when these big celestial events come up, such as the lunar eclipse on March 16th, getting the word out and showing people these views of those events is really great. One thing I love to do before going into further, I like to see where everybody is checking in from the world. So do me a favor in the comments, let us know where you're watching from. I see some people already doing so. We have Tom checking in from Charleston, South Carolina. Alan has a question, Alan Faircloth, they're asking, got shots of the moon tonight before packing it all up last night. How are you doing, Kyle? I am doing great. Thank you so much. Now tonight we won't just be looking at the full moon, we'll also be watching the rollout of NASA's SLS rocket as it heads out to the Vehicle Assembly Building. We'll be talking more about that, or excuse me, not from the Vehicle Assembly Building, heads out to Launch Complex 39B from the Vehicle Assembly Building. It is a very historic night here on the Space Coast as the SLS rocket begins its roll to the pad. But again, if you have any questions about astronomy, the nighttime sky, please feel free to let me know in the comments and I'll be more than happy to answer them. We have Vicky checking in from Boulder, Colorado, Joanne from Connecticut. We have Andrew checking in from Wake Forest, North Carolina. We have Chris Pizzoli checking in from San Diego. Astrophoto Peru checking in from Lima, Peru. Wow. Bruce checking in from a cloudy southern New Hampshire. And again, thank you so much for tuning in. It just blows my mind seeing this large, diverse, international crowd coming in to watch these live streams from all over the world. It just means so much to see you all here. We have Michael checking in from Phoenix, Arizona. Becca checking in from Jacksonville, Florida. Ross says, taking turns raining and snowing in Santa Fe, New Mexico. Sorry to hear that. Astrophoto Peru says the moon's upside down from here in the southern hemisphere. And that's really interesting if you're actually observing from the southern hemisphere, because we live on a spherical planet. The moon actually appears to flip 180 as you cross south below the equator. I'm also planning to switch to the views of NASA's SLS rocket as it rolls out to the pad, but unfortunately NASA is showing just a bunch of cars right now. A little disappointed in their coverage tonight, but once I do get those views, I will share them with you so we can enjoy views of NASA's new Artemis rocket launch vehicle as it heads out to the pad. Now, some quick fun lunar facts. Tonight's moon is the warm moon. It is also known as the full moon in the month of March. The full moon currently resides in the constellation of Virgo, one of my favorite constellations in the nighttime sky because it's absolutely rich with beautiful galaxies that we can see. If you tuned into our previous live stream just a few weeks ago for our Galaxy Marathon, we did take a look at some galaxies in the constellation of Virgo towards the end of that stream. And additionally, the moon is 380,000 kilometers away from the Earth, so it's pretty far away, but that's just nothing compared to the grand scheme of things in the universe. It's far enough away, though, that it does cause problems for astronauts when they go to the moon, in that there is a communications lag. Now, because the speed of light is fast, but not infinitely fast, it does take time to travel between point A and point B. As a result, it takes communications going to the spacecraft that's going to the moon about 1 second to get there and 1 second to come back. So that can certainly be a pain. And the reason I want to mention that, let me just make sure my thing is working okay now. It is. Okay. And the reason I wanted to mention that is because here is a view of the moon and NASA's SLS rocket as it begins to move out to Launch Complex 39B down here in Florida. Now, as I mentioned, I am privileged enough to actually live here in Central Florida and have the opportunity to go out to many of these launches. And seeing this happening is so incredibly exciting to me. I've been waiting for years and years for this rocket to actually make it out to the pad. This, again, is the SLS rocket in the Orion capsule that is actually going to be going to the moon here in just a few months. This is the first mission in NASA's Artemis program. And the Artemis program is super, super exciting because I actually have a video here I can show you while I'm
Through
talking.
Artemis,
From NASA,
the twin sister
the
of Apollo,
SLS rocket will be
we are
taking us
returning to the moon.
We haven't gone to the moon since the 1970s.
Artemis 1 will be the first flight test of each of these components.
So the Orion spacecraft here will be taking 4 astronauts
United together,
to the moon.
this
They
is
will
the
rendezvous
first
and
of
dock
Artemis's arrows,
SpaceX's
capable
Starship
of ushering in the
lander
next chapter of
descent
human
to
lunar
the surface
exploration,
sometime this decade.
with
Now,
each
this rocket
component
isn't going
playing
to
its
carry
part in a
astronauts
grander
to the
effort.
surface of the moon or anything like that.
We,
This
the
is just
people
unmanned
of
test
the
flight.
Artemis
This is
generation,
something
all
so
around this
incredibly
beautiful
exciting
world,
to
will bear
human
witness
beings make
to
it
what
back
we are
as
capable
they
of.
head back to
Together,
and so watching this
we
raw tonight
are going
is so
back to the
exciting because
moon.
This is the first, in my opinion, biggest sort of progress towards returning human beings to the moon, and I am again so excited for that. So again, the SLS rocket you can see here on the right hand side of the screen is rolling out to the launch pad, and we also have a live view of the moon tonight as well through my telescope, show sharing both at the same time. Was the video too loud? Oh, I apologize. I don't have headphones on. That's what I get. Let me see if I can fix that. So once again, if you're just tuning in, we're looking at live views of the full moon as it rises above Central Florida through my telescope, and we're also looking at views of the Space Launch System as it heads out to the launch pad. And these views on the right-hand side are being provided to us from NASA. So the Artemis missions will actually be leading up to a series of different complex missions. The first mission, Artemis 1, will just be an unmanned test flight to orbit the moon. That'll be sometime in June, hopefully. That'll be followed by the Artemis 2 mission just a few months later. A few years later in 2024. I wish it was a few months later. And that will carry astronauts to a fly-around orbit of the moon. They will just do a quick fly around the moon and come on back. And then that'll be followed by Artemis 3, which will conduct a lunar landing on the southern pole of the moon here. Further missions from that will be visiting the Gateway space station that will be orbiting the moon, and then followed by future missions to explore the moon and hopefully Mars. Donis J. Dennis says, I'm thrilled with the Artemis program. I was very young, but I remember seeing the Apollo missions as a child. That is so awesome. I'm so glad you have that memory. I will say I'm a bit too young to remember the Apollo program. I missed it by about 30 years or so. So my only exposure to seeing stuff go to the moon, seeing astronauts going to the moon, is watching the replays of those Apollo missions. And they were certainly a source of inspiration for me. So seeing human beings go back to the moon and beyond is really exciting to see. David asks, with the enormous cost of spaceflight, do you think it's realistic of a moon base? And that is a great question, David. I absolutely think it's realistic with the moon base. I think right now it's not sustainable with just NASA and the SLS rocket. I do believe it'll take commercial providers to be able to actually build out a lunar base at a reasonable cost. Believe it or not, each individual SLS rocket costs $4 billion, which is pretty astronomical. A lot of debate on whether or not that's actually worth it. I won't get into that, but it's certainly an expensive price tag just to send astronauts to the moon. And keep in mind, this is $4 billion, but it doesn't actually land on the moon. It rendezvous and docks with a lander in orbit around the moon. James asks, any idea how long the trip around the moon and return will take? That will be for the Artemis 2 mission. So it takes about 3 days to get to the moon and 3 or 4 days to come back, so about a week. Jeff asking, I wonder what the delay is for the command and control of the James Webb Space Telescope. That is a good question. It is almost certainly considerable. Significantly longer than a second if I had to guess, maybe even 10 seconds. Switching back here, you're looking at a full screen view again of the moon. I'll be switching back and forth between the views of the SLS rollout and the full moon. I just think it's super cool to see both at the same time, considering the roles of the Artemis program in landing on the moon. Alan wanting to know, Kyle, can you explain to some of your viewers why we don't see a dark side of the moon? That's a good question. So the moon is what's called tidally locked with the Earth. So that means it rotates on its axis exactly the same amount of time as it does to take one complete revolution around the Earth. As a result, one face of the moon is continuously facing us. Now, there's no such thing as a dark side of the moon. At some point during its entire revolution around the Earth, at least all of the lunar surface is illuminated by sunlight. But right now, we'd be looking at the dark side of the moon on the exact opposite side of the moon from our perspective. James wanting to know, are you using a filter on your live view of the moon? And actually, I'm only using a UV IR cut filter. David wanting to know, with all the craters on the moon, is it magnetic from them hitting Earth? No. Actually, it is not magnetic. The moon does not have a magnetic field or anything like that. The Earth has a very strong magnetic field, but the moon does not. Again, keep these questions coming. It's so awesome to talk to you guys, and you guys are asking great questions tonight. Russ on YouTube wanting to know, what's the months of Jupiter and Saturn returning to view of a telescope from New York? That is a great question, Russ, and the answer to that is you're going to have to wait a few months. Right now, Jupiter and Saturn are visible in the sky, but they're only visible in the morning, just before sunrise. So if you want to be able to see them, you'll have to get up really early and look off to the east. They'll become more visible at reasonable hours as we move out through the year, and by the summer and into the fall, you should be able to easily see the two, Jupiter and Saturn, from the rising in the east just after sunset. David wanting to know, why are there so many craters on the moon? And again, that is a fantastic question from David. The reason there are so many craters on the moon is because the moon, unlike the Earth, does not have an atmosphere to protect it from asteroids impacting it. As a result, we see the impacts of thousands of craters hitting the surface of the moon. Gail wanting to know, I'm not sure if this is a serious question, but I'll answer it on the stream. What is your opinion on the moon being hollow? Well, I have no opinion on this. I just have the fact of knowing that the moon is not hollow. If the moon was hollow, its gravitational pull would make 0 sense. Marcus wanting to know what setup your stream is currently using. Right now I'm using the Aperture 72 EDR refractor doublet telescope and a ZWO ASI 183 MC Pro camera. It's sitting on top of a Ioptron Sky Guider. Dennis wanting to know, Kyle, are you impressed with the image the James Webb Space Telescope released from NASA? I sure am. So what he's talking about there is a recent image the James Webb Space Telescope took of a star, and that image was so incredible because you could actually see thousands of galaxies in just one exposure shot, just showing some of the capabilities the James Webb Space Telescope will bring to the table. Another question, why do we only have one moon when other planets have many? And that is a good question. So the reason we only have one moon is just because we only have one moon. It's as simple as that. Other planets out there are much larger, and they had a bigger accretion disk, so they had more material, such as Jupiter and Saturn. As a result, more moons formed around them. Some Jupiter and Saturn, for example, also capture moons regularly, capture and release them. So it's entirely possible at some point in the distant past we did have multiple moons. Remember, the moon was formed as the result of an impact with another planet. The Earth and the moon, I believe, was called Theia, impacted the Earth some 3 billion years ago, and material from that impact spiraled off into orbit around the moon and eventually, or around the Earth, and eventually coalesced into our moon. So it's possible during that that sort of process of all that material combining, we may have had multiple moons orbiting the Earth. That certainly would not surprise me. That eventually all merged into one moon. Gail, that's totally okay. Completely fine. It is It was a good question. I'm going to be honest with you. Some people do believe in hollow moon, the moon being hollow, but it's a. I do apologize if you thought I wasn't taking you seriously. It is a serious question. I just don't believe the moon is hollow. The biggest reason we know the moon wouldn't be hollow, though, is because of the moon's gravity. If you were to think of the moon as being hollow, the spacecraft wouldn't be able to orbit it because its mass would be incredibly low. But if it were of a thicker density, which we know it to be, its gravitational pull would be higher. So that's how we know its densities, because we're able to orbit spacecraft around it. And we're also able to measure its mass from the tides and things like that. David wanting to know, if we didn't have a moon, how would the tides be different? If we didn't have a moon, there wouldn't be any tides at all. Well, take that back. There would be some tides from the interactions with the sun. It isn't just the moon that controls the tides. It is sort of an interaction between the sun and the moon sort of pulling on the Earth's body of water and producing bulges, which results in tides. Chris wanting to know, what is the most interesting fact you've learned about the moon? I always found the formation of the moon to be extremely interesting, learning about how it was able to form after a gigantic impact with Theia billions of years ago. The formation of the moon and how our understanding of the moon has evolved over time is something that seriously interests me. Donald wanting to know, is the moon's orbit a near circular orbit, or does it have an eccentric orbit around, let me see if I can understand this question, around the Earth as other planets have around the sun? So the moon actually does have an eccentric orbit. It does not orbit the Earth in a perfect orbit, so there is an apogee and a perigee to it. I don't remember what that eccentricity is off the top of my head, but the moon does orbit in a somewhat eccentric orbit. Roz wanting to know, have craters been counted? I imagine they come and go. They don't actually go anywhere. The erosion on the moon is non-existent. Over time, you do have some erosion from things like solar winds, but some of these craters you can see in this image existed for millions and millions of years. So they do increase as more and more objects impact the moon. Looks like NASA has turned on some lights on the SLS spacecraft, so let's switch back to that view. David wanting to know, do you think the conspiracy theories about the moon landing have any credibility at all or are dumb? I absolutely believe we landed on the moon. There's overwhelming evidence to support we landing on the moon. We landed on the moon. It's a good question. We know we landed on the moon because the Russians actually tracked the Apollo spacecraft as they headed to the moon. We know we landed on the moon because we've sent spacecraft there after the fact and taken photos of the lunar descent module as it sits on the surface of the moon. We know we went to the moon because we can actually point lasers at Tranquility Base. The Apollo astronauts actually left a little reflector on the surface of the moon to help us measure the distance between the Earth and the moon, and we can clearly see that reflector there. So something put it there, and NASA said it was humans, and they have video of the human beings putting it on the surface of the moon, so it stands to reason the most likely reason why that reflector is on the moon is because astronauts put it there. So that is a good question, David. And I do absolutely agree, by the way, there are no dumb questions. So if you have a question and you think it's silly, just feel free to comment and I will answer it. Alan wanting to know, when is the launch of SLS scheduled? SLS is scheduled to launch sometime in May or June. Bruce wanting to know, has anybody ever recorded an asteroid strike on the visible side? And actually, yes, there has been quite a few impacts recorded through amateur astronomers even have taken video of asteroids hitting the moon. Mark wanting to know, is it possible to see Neptune with a telescope? And it absolutely is. You can see Neptune with even a small telescope. You won't be able to see much in the way of details, but a larger telescope will be able to resolve an actual disk to Neptune. So again, if you're just tuning in, you're looking at live views of tonight's full moon through the Aperture 72 EDR refractor, and you're also looking at views from NASA as its new moon rocket, the Space Launch System, rolls out to Launch Complex 39B. I'm your host, Kyle, and I'm taking your questions about astronomy, the nighttime sky. Again, if you're watching us, do us a favor, like this video, subscribe to our channel if you're on our YouTube channel watching this, share this video with your friends on Facebook, get people excited, get the word out. It's what we're here to do. David again wanting to know, David, by the way, you're asking great questions tonight. Does the moon always keep the same distance from the Earth? It does not. Because the moon does orbit in an ellipse, there are points where the moon is further away from the Earth along its orbit than at other points. The furthest point away from the Earth is known as apogee, and the closest point to the Earth is known as perigee. This is also why, for example, we have annular eclipses. So if you're not familiar with an annular eclipse, it's where the moon goes in front of the sun, but its angular size, being further away, is not big enough to completely cover up the disk of the moon. And a total solar eclipse happens when the moon is closer to perigee, and its disk is able to completely cover up the surface of the sun. Raymond wanting to know, do you know why the moon almost doesn't rotate? So again, the moon is tightly locked with the Earth. So that means one side of the moon is always facing us. It does complete a rotation, but its rotation exactly matches its orbital period. Russ asking, any suggestions on a astrophotography setup? Actually, Russ, if you check out our YouTube channel, we have just uploaded a great video on some really game-changing upgrades you can get for beginner astrophotographers. So I strongly recommend checking out that video. It is a fantastic resource put together by one of our team members, Tegan, and he really helps a lot with this stuff. Gail asking a great question. How often do you do these live feeds, and are they always the moon? So Gail, we actually do these live streams pretty frequently, about once a month at least. Probably trying to kick up the pace a little bit, but we don't just live stream the full moon. We live stream lunar eclipses. We live stream views of the night sky of like galaxies and nebula, sort of doing electrically assisted astronomy. or just basically taking long exposures of stuff in the sky and sharing them with you. So we do tons of live streams, and we absolutely plan on continuing them. Alan wanting to know, when's the next galaxy hunt? I don't know if I'm going to do another galaxy hunt this year, so probably sometime next year. But I'm glad you enjoyed it. David wanting to know, does the moon look different from the north and south poles? It does. So if you were to look up the moon at the southern hemisphere, you would notice the moon appears to be upside down from the perspective that we're normally used to. And this is because we live on a spherical Earth. As you pass south of the equator, the moon appears to flip in the sky. Ross wanting to know, are you interested in going into space? If so, which vehicle would you go on? Well, Ross, that is a good question. I absolutely am interested in going to space. As a matter of fact, I'll straight up tell you, it's my dream to go into space. I absolutely hope to one day, and I would absolutely love the opportunity to fly on a SpaceX rocket, to be perfectly honest with you. But I don't think I'd like to fly on a suborbital vehicle. Sorry, Blue Origin and Virgin Galactic. But I absolutely would love to fly on like a SpaceX Starship, for example. Russ wanting to know, what's more entertaining, a telescope or astrophotography? For me, I do mostly astrophotography, so I find that a little bit more entertaining. But again, it just sort of depends on your preferences. Tim wanting to know, does the moon have black holes? Fortunately, no. If the moon had black holes, we'd be in serious trouble. Russ says, I feel like the work that goes into astrophotography is pretty stressful. Viewing the sky through a telescope is very relaxing, and it absolutely is. There are times where I just like to go out to a dark sky site with a pair of binoculars and just look up, because the things you can see with just a pair of binoculars is pretty spectacular. Bob wanting to know, is it true that all the craters on the moon are of the same depth? And that is not true. There are some craters that are really, really big and really, really deep. You can see one crater here in this image. That is Tycho crater, the most prominent crater on the moon, sort of in the southern hemisphere. If you can get an idea what I'm talking about, that crater is deeper than the Grand Canyon. But there are some craters who are only a few inches thick. Got a question on Facebook asking, which observatories have you been to, and do you have a favorite? Well, Ross, I unfortunately have not been to many observatories. That is one thing I have done, I've just never gotten the opportunity to do. If I had to pick one to go to, it'd probably be the McDonald Observatory in Texas. But unfortunately, I just haven't had the opportunity, and I'm very disappointed by that. I really want to one day. Got a question on YouTube, and they're asking how big is the moon? And that is a good question. The moon is a little over 2,000 miles across. So it's pretty big. Lyle wanting to know, when will the Saturn be back in the sky in the night sky for North America? Saturn is actually currently in the sky, but you do have to get up quite early for it. So around 5 or 6 in the morning, you will see Saturn rising along the eastern horizon. But if you want to see it at a more reasonable time, you will have to wait another 5 or 6 months or so. So sometime in the fall, you should be able to get a nice view of Saturn. Alan wanting to know, do you know of any of the surface minerals? So the moon is very rich in things like titanium basalt and iron, for example. As a matter of fact, if you were to do something like adjust the exposure at the moon, or not the exposure, the saturation of the moon, you'd be able to create what's called a mineral map of the moon that shows some of those areas that are more rich in iron and some of those regions that are more rich in titanium basalt. Now, the moon's also rich in things like, believe it or not, water. So actually, NASA sent what was called the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter to the moon in 2009, and then impacted the surface of the moon with the upper stage of an Atlas V and a probe, and they sent the Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter through that plume, and they were able to see that the moon has tons of water, enough that where it could be used as drinking water for a lunar base, as well as rocket fuel. Now you may ask yourself, how can you use water to make rocket fuel? Rocket fuel is actually a common fuel for rockets is liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen. So if you just break water into its constituent components of oxygen and hydrogen, and then you super chill it, you will be able to use it as rocket fuel. David wanting to know, is our moon average compared to other moons? It's certainly average compared to moons like Io, which are volcanic nightmares, and Europa, which have thick layers of ice on it. But we do have a unique moon in that it is relatively large compared to our planet, and it is also the only of the 4 terrestrial inner planets. Our moon is by far the largest. Now, the moon pales in comparison, though, to Jupiter's moons, Io, Europa, Ganymede, and Callisto, as well as some of Saturn's moons, namely Titan, for example. But the moon is decently large for a moon. Jose wanting to know, how does an eclipse occur? So an eclipse occurs generally in seasons, meaning the moon's orbit is inclined relative to the Earth's equator about 28 degrees or so. 18 degrees or so. Because of that, we don't get an eclipse every single month, but we do get seasons where the moon's orbit is perfectly lined up with the Earth so that we do get eclipses. A solar eclipse occurs when the moon passes directly in front of the sun from our perspective and casts its shadow onto the surface of the moon, or Earth, and a lunar eclipse occurs when the moon goes behind the Earth's shadow and turns a sort of blood red. Howard wanting to know, has there been any extrasolar planets discovered around Alpha Centauri A or B? I do believe that Alpha Centauri A does have a confirmed extrasolar planet. I know Proxima Centauri has a couple. Proxima Centauri is part of the Alpha Centauri system, but I believe Alpha Centauri A does have an extrasolar planet that we know of. Gail wanting to know, if they build a lunar base, would the soil grow anything? That's a good question. I actually don't know the answer to that one. Truthfully, that is a really good question. I'm trying to think. I lean towards no, but I'm not 100%. So that is a good question, Gail. I'm actually kind of curious. I think I'll look that up after the stream's over. Howard, this is being broadcasted from Lakeland, Florida. And the views of the Space Launch System are coming from NASA at Cape Canaveral, Florida. I have a question on YouTube, and they're asking how long is the Earth from the Moon? If I understand your question, you're asking how far away the Earth is from the Moon, and it is about 380,000 kilometers. Jeff would like to know how powerful a laser would it take to reflect off the mirror they left on the lunar landing? Is it legal to do so? Second question first, it is absolutely legal to do so. Just make sure there's no planes around. And I actually don't know how strong it would be. I don't think it would be able to be done with a commercial like laser pointer, but I do think, and I know for a fact actually, many observatories out in the country do have lasers strong enough to do so. Sharon with a question. They're asking, did anyone catch the space junk that hit the moon? If they did, where would it have hit? So if I remember correctly, the Chinese upper stage that was being tracked as that space junk ended up hitting the far side of the moon, so would not have been visible from a telescope. So again, we're looking at beautiful views of the moon as well as views of NASA's Space Launch System as it heads out to the launch complex. Chris wanting to know, what's the light pollution right now for your current view of the moon? So I live in a Bortle 9 zone right where I'm at, but the moon is not impacted by light pollution whatsoever. So little to no impact to the views of the moon. And this is because the moon is just overwhelmingly bright. Jose wanting to know, does looking at the moon hurt your eyes? And the answer to that question is no. Well, take that back. Looking at the full moon won't hurt your eyes. Looking at the sun without a light pollution filter on will absolutely hurt your eyes, so don't do that. But looking at the moon through a telescope, looking at the stars through the telescopes will absolutely do zero damage whatsoever to your eyes. Got a question coming in. They're asking, what is the largest impact crater on the surface of the moon? And that would be the South Pole Aitken Basin on the southern pole of the moon, and is roughly 1,600 miles in diameter, making it the largest, one of the largest impact craters in the solar system. Gail wanting to know, could an asteroid knock the moon out of its orbit or affect it like they talk about with an extinction event on the Earth? So if an asteroid were to knock the moon out of its orbit, it'd have to be either extraordinarily large, so the size of a planet nearly, or moving at an incredible velocity. We don't know of any asteroids that have that capability. So to answer your question, in theory it could. but it would have to be moving extraordinarily fast or be extraordinarily large to the point where it would probably be a planet in its own right. Such an object would obviously be known thousands of years in advance before it poses any threat to us. Diane wanting to know, there is a circular spot with white lines radiating out from it. What is that? It's towards the bottom on the right. And that would be the crater Tycho. That was named after the astronomer Tycho Brahe, and it is by far one of the larger impact craters on the surface of the moon. And it was also considered a possible landing site for the Apollo missions. Ross wanting to know, why have there only been United States astronauts on moon missions? So the reason for that is because when we last went to the moon in the 1970s, we had not partnered with the Europeans to do so. We had not partnered with any other countries, and we were obviously in a race against the Soviet Union to land on the moon. So the reason we've never included European partners or any other partners besides just the United States is just because we didn't have those partnerships available at the time. But now we do. The European Space Agency will be involved heavily in the Artemis program. They actually built the service module for the Orion capsule that is currently rolling out to the launch pad tonight. And there will be European astronauts on the first moon missions with the Artemis program. So to answer your question in short, we've never sent, only United States astronauts have been on moon missions is because in the 70s, partnerships with other countries for space exploration had not yet fully come to fruition like they are now. David wanting to know, were the landing sites for the Apollo mission specifically chosen or random? So they were specifically chosen, and they were chosen for a multitude of purposes. The Apollo missions, the early Apollo missions, Apollo 11, Apollo 12, and 13 and 14, although 13 actually didn't land on the moon and 14 was landed at Apollo 13's landing site, were chosen because they were close to the equator. And because they were close to the equator, NASA would be able to conduct a fly around of the moon in the event of an emergency, which did happen on Apollo 13. Later missions, Apollo 15, 16, and 17, were actually able to get off that free return trajectory beforehand and land on different sites. Those were also chosen with intention. Apollo 15 landed at, I forget exactly where, somewhere on the moon, obviously. I forget exactly where. Mount Hadley Rill, that's right. Apollo 15 landed in Hadley, which was the location of a giant sort of ancient lake bed. And basically they were chosen for sites that were safe to visit and were geologically interesting. Okay, folks, I just looked outside for a second, and it does look like I have some pretty thick clouds about to roll in and completely obscure my views of the moon. So that will probably do it for me tonight. We've been live for about an hour now. Thank you guys so much for asking such great questions. It was absolutely awesome to talk to each and every one of you about astronomy. Talking to everyone about the night sky just really makes our day, and it's what we're here to do. But again, my name is Kyle. I'm with High Point Scientific. Thank you so much for tuning in and asking such great questions tonight. It was an absolute pleasure on my end. Our next live stream will probably be sometime next week. We'll share details about that, but that actually will not be a astronomy live stream like this. That'll be something unique that we're putting on. But I will leave you with these views of NASA's SLS rocket as it rolls out to the pad. My name is Kyle. I'm with High Point Scientific, and always remember to keep looking up.